Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Beta Year program with your host Tariq Khan. Today we will analyze and explore the role of international community in resolving Kashmir issue. Let me introduce our guest, Miss Clary Bidwell from Scotland. You are a human rights activist and director. Let's Decide Kashmir. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining, and you are most welcome in program.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Ma'am, how would you become aware of Kashmir issue, and why is it important to bring it to world's attention? How would you explain?
Well, I guess sadly, I have never been aware of the Kashmir issue at all, which is an issue in itself because it's hidden from the media, it's hidden from the mainstream line of the world. So, I mean, I learned purely because I went on holiday to India. I was in Mumbai. I purchased a couple of Kashmiri rugs from a Kashmiri salesman there, and we kept in touch through technology, just occasional text, how were you? And then one day I'd sent him a text asking him, how are your family? And back came the reply that he didn't know. And he told me that, you know, the Indian troops had gone in, they'd revoked Article 370, 35A, I can't remember the name of that now, and that they'd revoked that, and he had absolutely no idea. They turned off the internet, no communication. And, you know, it was kind of horrifying for me because, you know, these sort of things, they don't happen here. That's not normal, and that you cannot contact, you know, on a human level, that you cannot contact your parents. So I started like looking around for the media and the news on the telly, you know, why wasn't this being covered? Which then took me into social media websites, United Nations websites, a lot of the MPs over here on Facebook, and kind of got into dialogue with lots of different people, and then realized how extreme this issue was, that they'd been promised rights for self-determination for 73 years and they'd never had this, yet it was, you know, hidden away from us to obviously suit the world's economies or whatever the issue was there. So I think that it's really important that it's brought to the international attention so that you know, human rights can prevail and we can see what's happening, and we need the people in this to come forward and bring forward that power, because it seems to be suiting the world leaders and their conscience just to look after themselves and their own countries at the forfeit of human rights, really, and put an economy over human rights. And it's gone on too long, and the atrocities and things that are occurring, it's just not acceptable.
Ma'am, why is it important that international community be involved in resolving the Kashmir issue, and how would you explain the self-determination of Kashmiris?
Yeah, I mean, it is important that we get as many people involved in this as possible, because it's, you know, it's in the United Nations resolutions there that, you know, Kashmir is promised its rights for self-determination, which I see, for me, it's seen, you know, globally as a bilateral issue, between Pakistan and India, but then that's overlooking the Kashmiris' voice. And as we know, a lot of the Kashmiri leaders are, you know, locked up or imprisoned or incarcerated, and you know, there's many different political factions within that, so they effectively have no voice. Within the UK, when we've tried to campaign for it, that's what we're told here, that it's a bilateral issue. I don't see it like that. I see it that self-determination, a right for sovereignty over your own country, is actually a basic human right. So my fight for it, although it's within the UN's resolutions, is that there should be the, you know, the three-way vote. There should be the choice, whether they're with Pakistan, whether they want to go with India, or whether they want independence. So I'd be pursuing it on that level. For me, that's how I see it. I do understand, you know, there's so many United Nations resolutions that there seems to be some confusion over whether, you know, it's the two-way vote, and then maybe, you know, Kashmir is going to have their say, but I don't see it like that. I think for self-determination, it should be for everybody. I just think that we do, you know, the world is silent on it. A lot of the economies, they're selling their weapons of war to India, to Pakistan, and it's suiting them. But it's not helping either India or Pakistan either, this huge military presence. It's not helping their country folk. So it seems to me, you know, the simple solution is let these people determine the future of their own country. Scotland had their vote. 700 years ago, the Scottish were fighting for their freedom. And now, we have the democracy. And we were able to vote 4 years ago here in Scotland for whether we wanted to remain with the UK or whether we wanted to be independent. And so I don't understand how another country cannot be given that option. And given it was the UK that partitioned them and left them in that state. So I do feel that there's a moral duty for the UK government to use their presence at the United Nations, to use their presence internationally, and go back and resolve this issue.
What role can the international community play in helping to resolve the Kashmir issue? What do you think?
I think for me, it's the people power. The people can then raise awareness to other people. These people can then lobby to their local parliamentarians, to their government, and insist that their government then go forward. So you've got the power of the people putting the pressure on the governments, who can then put pressure on the United Nations, use their power there, raise awareness around the world so that other governments can become involved. I mean, it would be wonderful for somebody to take on that role of the peacekeeper, another country, helping Pakistan and India to resolve this issue. I mean, there is discussions at the moment that there's private talks going on with United Arab Emirates. It's very hard to know, as somebody that's campaigning for Kashmiri's rights, when things are so kept private or hidden, to know what you're doing with that. So I do think there should be more openness, honestness and transparency within what's happening. I think unity is a key issue. I think the international community can help, bridge the gap with the Kashmiris, bring their voices out and try and work together for self-determination, putting ideologies apart, irrespective of what you want, to stop the abuses that are going on and bring peace to Asia. I think there can be a big global movement to support the Kashmiris and vice versa, work together as human beings for those human rights. So it's effectively the people joining unity and putting pressure on our governments and on United Nations to become functional. And we're seeing so many crimes at the moment committed in India, which I think in itself they're a threat to global peace. So I think that really needs to be, alerted. We've seen how small the world community is with COVID, the rise of COVID. Yet we're seeing across the world, although the rates are rising rapidly in India, New Zealand are the only country at the moment that are banning them from entering or any quarantine rules. So we've clearly got this power dominance going on in our world, and we need people in the international community and democratic politicians standing up and demanding an end to this.
What obstacles stand in the way, and how can we overcome them? Do you think that India is showing a non-serious behavior to resolve the Kashmir issue? How would you analyze this?
Yeah, no, from an international perspective, what you've said there is completely right. So when I was looking around the world to see who was standing up for Kashmiris, who was saying what, I mean, Imran Khan's speech at the United Nations, where one of the things he said was very powerful. And one of the things he said in there was like, with the United Kingdom people, if you said to them that 8 million animals were caged and locked up, they'd be up in arms. They seem to have this misguided thing at times, but the difficulty is it's not in our media, and the concern is that is because of the Indian lobby power. We know there's been these fake accounts, false information, where they've been infiltrating for the last 15 years in academics and at politicians, feeding them the false information. So up until now, that in Pakistan have lobbied ferociously and everywhere and trying to bring this out to international awareness. And I think a lot of the campaign work around the world has highlighted that. I met I can remember the president of Tariq Khan at the Houses of Parliament in the UK and managed to have a couple of minutes talk with him. And So it's clear his evidence. I've been in so many Zoom meets with him and conferences with him, and he's versed on the issue, and he's saying that he will do anything to solve this problem. Whereas in turn, India, they're not doing anything. They've just gone in there. They've got their hold on Kashmir. This is ours, and that's the end of it. And their narrative is that it's Pakistan sending in the terrorists, and this is what they've got to overcome. And they've managed to spread out that narrative for so long that that's what so many people, that's the West perception here. And that's the trouble, that they're not seen as freedom fighters. They're not seen as people fighting for the rights for their land. They're just, the term terrorist is used in our media. It is thrown around too freely. So that's what we're up against as well. Pakistan need to keep doing what they're doing. I do think there is more. I mean, not a complete expert, but it would be great to see, if Pakistan keep coming up against these brick walls, to see if they can somehow give more power to the Kashmiris for their voice in Azad's side to come forward, to be represented at the United Nations. I think Kashmiris need a voice, and that's something that Pakistan could perhaps help and work towards doing. India are just a threat and notoriously difficult to deal with. Even in my dialogues with the citizens of all the countries at the beginning of all this, you could clearly see, the extreme Hindu Indians. I've got to be careful because there are so many democratic Indians, people standing up for Kashmiris, for themselves, for democracy. But those extreme Hindu bar that are in there, they're rude, they're extreme, they're obnoxious, they're at the basic human level. And then we're seeing this transferred, higher up with their lynchings, with their mentality, how they just seem to, commit these atrocious crimes with no care. It's awful. So we're all dealing with something horrendous, I think. And I think Pakistan have really tried their best to put their efforts out there internationally. But unfortunately, again, it's the economy that I think they're up against, and world leaders' own self-interests, and plus the arms, the money that's involved in selling weapons.
How do you view Articles 35A and 37 and its removal as well as violation of Constitution of Kashmir by India and the imposed of lockdown on Kashmir? How do you analyze? How do you view this?
Yeah, well, I mean, that probably should be the first step of anything. Those troops need to be removed. I mean, that India had no right to do that. And this is where, when I came into this, that I couldn't understand. It wasn't India's decision to revoke that. And so essentially we can see the way they went in, locking the country down overnight. They snuck in. There was no democratic process to discuss it. It was just complete dictatorship. So that shows already they knew they had something, they knew they were doing wrong. They've gone in, locked the country, disabled all communication, turned off all communication, so that nobody anywhere could get message in and message out. Because the impact on that, on humans and families around the globe unable to contact their families, that's extreme, that's huge. And then we know that, young men were taken away. There's evidence reports of, rapes, crimes, abuses. People were kept in curfew, not allowed out. And that to me is extreme. That's against Geneva Conventions. It's against international law. What we're seeing now is a change in demography, which is, is against that. And it's trying to bring in the Hindus, the extreme Hindus, to change that if there was ever that vote, that they've then got the control over that. So that is the root of this. They had no right to revoke that. And they've basically just gone in and said, this is ours, and that's it. And they're just holding that ground. And sadly, it seems to be getting worse and not better. We're looking at all the furs they're putting on the reporters. They're not, all the time, these extreme, the UPA laws where they're not allowed to speak up. And so they're living in fear. And I mean, sadly, I'm seeing a lot of them seem to be losing heart. They're losing voice. I think it's a terrible situation. And I think this is what I can't get my head around. World leaders are, they're people like you and I. They're ordinary humans. How can they live with themselves letting it? They're complicit. This is what it feels like. They're complicit in allowing it. And that I don't understand. And so for me, you know, they had no right to do that. Well, I can honestly say I'm glad I'm not a woman in, you know, Indian occupied Kashmir. They, you know, the fear of the rape, the fear of their children missing, the fear of the unknown. I mean, it's horrendous. The evidence for the mass rapes, the crimes, if you look back at Kun and Pushpura, they're still seeking justice for that. I mean, I think justice at one point, you know, there was evidence was found, a court case, but then it's never been forwarded through, it's been left. So it's absolutely dreadful. I do know that the women of Kashmir are strong. I do know that they are resilient, and I do know there's a lot of them standing up there and really trying to get their voices out there, but it's really hard. No, it's absolutely shocking because there's no rights. There are no human rights for anybody out there, men or women or children. If you look at the United Nations human rights articles and charters, you know, they have their needs, a right to a safe environment, you know, and as they list through, and then it says that every human has a right to have all of those needs met. And it's not happening. And when you look down and not one is being met, so there are no women's rights, there are no human rights, there are no children's rights being met. And so why have this United Nations wonderful, you know, set up articles and charters if they're not going to implement them and all they're going to do is talk about them? It's shocking.
How do you observe major powers' role like US, China, European Union, Russia in resolving the Kashmir issue? How would you explain?
Yeah, no, I think they can play a very important role. And I think already we've seen the impact of China's first role on that. You know, when they stood their ground and called conflict at the border, they're clearly not preparing for India to come in and take over that territory. So we saw that role. The UK, because they're the ones that partitioned it, like I said, they've got that moral duty. They should be going back and fixing up that mess. They're also, all three of them, holding powers of the United Nations. So all of them have the power to implement the UNC's resolutions and call for that self-determination. We've got difficulties going on with, you know, the superpowers, America and UK, against China, or battling with China so much that they are bringing out the issue of the Uyghurs and saying how shocking the human rights are in China with the Uyghurs, but they're overlooking what's happening, you know, in India. So there's the battle going on there. For me, the crux is really in America because they're the biggest power. And it's like if Joe Biden said tomorrow, right, we need to get self-determination for Kashmiris, we would have self-determination for Kashmiris. So this is where I see the power of the people, the movement, us all joining together and trying to raise that awareness and build that unity and doing whatever we can, you know, to bring this to other people, to say, come on, look, we need to stand up now for human rights against trade. So the pressure then on our countries, they have the mechanics, all of those, to bring this into play, get United Nations functional as it should be. And we, you know, we pay the wages of United Nations. That comes out of our taxes. The governments should be from the people, you know, for the people. And we're not. We're seeing this huge mismatch. So it's incumbent on all of us, I think, every person in the world to, you know, let our parliaments know and lobby against them, because if the people want something, the people should be able to have it.
Ma'am, thank you so much for your valuable and precious analysis on the role of international community in resolving the Kashmir issue. And thank you so much again.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.